Gary Oldman is my hero. That's it. You know, he's like, right. When I went to drama school, everybody used to quote him in all of his films. Everything, not being in control, not knowing, anticipation, like waiting for something to go wrong.
Tom Hardy once admitted, without these 5 actors, he wouldn't be Tom Hardy. Not the hardened warrior, not the tortured soul, not even the unpredictable scene stealer.
It looks like you got chewed up pretty bad, Jake.
I'll have to listen to it on the radio.
I forgive everyone, baby. You know what I'm trying to say is that the course of your life, you know, it is changing. And you don't even see it.
What are you talking about?
His artistry has always been in dialogue with theirs. Each one taught him something specific. How to weaponize silence, how to sink into stillness, how to unleash chaos, how to let pain bleed through the skin. These aren't casual influences. They're the foundation of everything he does. And today, we'll trace those exact lessons piece by piece. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Number 1, Gary Oldman. When Tom Hardy calls Gary Oldman his hero and blueprint, he isn't exaggerating. For him, Oldman wasn't just a performer to admire from a distance. He was the example of how acting could be stripped of excess, sharpened down to something magnetic. That became crystal clear when the two worked together on Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. Hardy expected fireworks, maybe big speeches, or commanding volume. Instead, Oldman spoke very little, and when he did, it was in a tone so measured it barely rose above a whisper. Yet, everyone on set gravitated toward him. The room seemed to tighten around his smallest actions. Hardy saw something that day he couldn't shake. It wasn't about how many lines you delivered, but how you delivered nothing at all. A slowed breath, a shift in focus, an unfinished glance. These moments told the story louder than dialogue ever could. Most actors in his place tried to push harder, talk bigger, or grab attention through movement. Oldman was teaching the opposite. Stillness was not emptiness. It was a weapon. Hardy carried that revelation into his own performances. In Peaky Blinders, his Alfie Solomons pauses mid-sentence and lets silence sit like smoke in the air. That silence didn't break tension. It built it. Oldman wasn't just a model. He was Hardy's compass, teaching him control through silence. Number 2, Daniel Day-Lewis. For Tom Hardy, Daniel Day-Lewis wasn't just another actor to admire from afar. He became what Hardy once called the final boss of acting, a figure so intense and disciplined that Hardy began to question whether he had barely tapped into what his own craft could be. Day-Lewis didn't simply play roles, he lived inside them, shutting the door on the outside world until every detail of his character felt alive. During the making of There Will Be Blood, Day-Lewis isolated himself, avoided casual interaction, and even slept in costume. For Hardy, stories like that were a revelation. They weren't eccentric tales of method acting. They were evidence that immersion could transform a performance into something that felt permanent, something beyond pretending. This was acting as ritual, and Hardy studied it like sacred scripture. But Hardy also recognized he couldn't copy it fully. Day-Lewis disappeared so completely that trying to mimic the process would have destroyed him. What he could take, though, was the patience, the willingness to let a moment stretch uncomfortably, to let silence rumble louder than any line. You can see that influence in The Revenant, where Hardy stayed locked in character and used long, wordless stretches to create dread. From Day-Lewis, Hardy learned that immersion is not about noise, but about listening to the silence inside a character. Number 3, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando didn't respect the rules of acting. He set them on fire. While most actors of his era followed neat, polished delivery, Brando let the mess show. Tom Hardy studied him closely and came to understand what Brando meant when he said, "Acting is the expression of a neurotic impulse." That phrase stuck with him. What Brando did on screen looked chaotic. He mumbled. He tripped over words. He stared off as if his thoughts had slipped. But Hardy realized it wasn't clumsy. It was planned chaos, and somehow it felt more real than perfection. Brando made mistakes into rhythm. In On the Waterfront, a pause or a stammer created tension, like a musical rest holding the audience in place. Hardy watched those moments again and again, peeling them apart like sheet music. He noticed posture drove everything. A slouch, a heavy lean, or a sudden glance could set the tone before a line was even spoken. Voice came second. Intensity came third. The body was the spark, and everything else followed. Hardy carried that forward in Bronson. His unpredictable shifts in tone, sudden laughs, or violent turns came straight from Brando's playbook. But he also saw danger in it. Lean too far into chaos, and it collapses. That balance, instability controlled just enough, became his lesson. Brando gave Hardy permission to break patterns, proving chaos could sing like music. Number 4, Robert De Niro. Tom Hardy often says silence can be used like a weapon, and he connects that directly to Robert De Niro. For Hardy, De Niro wasn't just an actor to watch, but almost a code to crack. He studied him closely, frame by frame, word by word, trying to understand how someone could disappear so completely into a role. What stood out wasn't just the physical transformations, though De Niro was famous for them, it was how those physical choices unlocked his emotions. Gaining or losing weight wasn't vanity. It was what Hardy called war preparation, a way to prepare the mind for the battles inside the story. In Taxi Driver, Hardy noticed how De Niro made every pause feel dangerous, like the character was holding back something violent just under the surface. In The Deer Hunter, silence replaced dialogue in a way that made audiences lean in, waiting for the break. Hardy recognized that stillness could hit harder than constant speaking, and when it finally cracked, the release was explosive. This wasn't chaos, it was control. Hardy carried that language into his own work. As Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, he relied on presence more than words, letting controlled movement and physical transformation dominate the screen. From De Niro, Hardy learned that transformation isn't costume. It's the body itself, speaking a louder truth. Number 5. Sean Penn. For Tom Hardy, Sean Penn revealed something the others didn't: the true cost of honesty. Hardy has often said Penn goes so deep into a role, it's unsettling, almost frightening. He studied Mystic River, as if it were a manual, watching how Penn gave himself over to grief in a way that didn't look staged. From the twitching in his hands to the pacing that seemed impossible to predict, every movement carried the kind of pain that made audiences uneasy. That was what caught Hardy's attention. Penn wasn't performing to impress. He was bleeding in front of the camera. Hardy described Penn as someone who kicks the fourth wall in. In practice, that meant the audience didn't feel safe watching him. They weren't just looking at a character, they were staring into an exposed nerve. In Mystic River, silences were fractured. Words came at strange rhythms, and Hardy noticed that it was those gaps between dialogue that carried the most weight. Stillness wasn't calm, it was rage locked in a box. The lesson Hardy carried forward was that authenticity comes with a price. You have to be willing to hurt, and to let that hurt leak onto the screen, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Penn convinced Hardy that vulnerability is not weakness. It's the sharpest, most dangerous edge an actor can wield. Tom Hardy isn't just a performer moving from role to role. He's a living collage made up of Oldman's restraint, Day-Lewis's immersion, Brando's chaos, De Niro's transformation, and Penn's vulnerability. Each of these titans gave him a piece of the map, shaping how he builds characters and delivers truth on screen. When you watch Hardy now, which influence do you see most? Is it the stillness, the unpredictability, or the raw emotion? Let us know in the comments. Hardy's work proves something simple but powerful. Great actors aren't born. They are sculpted by the echoes of those before them.